Today I'm recording this very spontaneously and I'm talking to the question, how do I feed my emptiness and why? And why is it actually not necessary? What happens if we wouldn't do that? And I'm going to talk about a story about the empty flute. And obviously the flute, the music instrument, needs to be empty, because otherwise you can't play it. There's going to be no music, there's going to be no sound. The flute needs to be empty. And I'm also going to talk about the hungry ghost, which is, it comes from Zen Buddhism. And this is something that even I feel like I'm judging myself, and maybe that's actually the point. So I honestly think it's important because I can see my own behavior changes and I can observe it, and I think it's sometimes scary, so I just wanted to share my thoughts on this. So how do I feel my emptiness? My favorite way is Instagram stories. Ironically, very ironic, because this is probably gonna go into my Instagram stories and you're probably gonna see it through Instagram. Maybe you're gonna see it through YouTube. YouTube is my second favorite way to fill my emptiness, or like to fill the silence, to just like avoid silence, which is already kind of the answer to the question. Well, the question was, how do I feed my emptiness and why? And Instagram and YouTube, that's already pretty exhausting. And if I need more, then that's going to be food. So there are many different ways, there are many different things that we do to fill an emptiness. And I'm talking about not a like physical emptiness, I'm talking about a sense of a longing or a desire, and something that seems to be lacking, like something that seems to be missing, right? And I'm asking myself that, and I'm observing that when I go on Instagram, and I am pretty aware of what I'm doing there. And still, I'm like, oh my God, like I'm usually actually checking the Instagram feed and not the stories. But I can see so many people checking so many stories. Like I can see it from other people, and I can also see like how, like, people who are checking my own stories, and I'm like, wow, they check my story almost every day. That means obviously you are on Instagram every day, and I can see that because I'm also on Instagram every day. And again, there's nothing wrong about Instagram, there's nothing wrong about social media or YouTube, but like with everything in life, it's all about how we use it. All of these things can be used in a good way and in a bad way, or like in a conscious way that is helping us to like connect and to grow. But I really feel, and that's an observation for myself, that I'm not really feeling connected. So I noticed today, like I was reading a book and I was having a coffee, and then, I feel relaxed and I'm like, oh, I'm just gonna check what this friend is doing. And maybe I'm actually usually checking about people who are at least in my environment, because I actually want to really connect to them. And then instead of just checking what this one person is doing, I end up like reading like 5 different posts. And it really sucks you in. Like the algorithms became really, really smart and well done to like keep you going and keep you scrolling, and like click on one thing like this, then the next thing, and hit like the next thing. There is always something there. And so today, after I checked my Instagram, I just noticed that actually I felt less happy than before checking Instagram. So before I was reading my book and I was drinking my cappuccino, and then I checked Instagram, and I just noticed that I felt a little less happy and a little less relaxed, because I think Instagram always brings me this feeling that I'm missing out on something because this person is doing that and that person is doing that. Like usually on Instagram, if you check it in the stories, somebody is always doing something great. And this might be different for you. I think it's very individual, and I'm not saying everything that we're sharing is bad, but I think we really have to be very aware, like ask yourself, and I ask myself, why, like what am I looking for when I check my Instagram? And what am I looking for when I check social media? Maybe for you it's not Instagram, maybe it's something else. You can fill in the gap, like whatever. Take a moment to ask yourself, like what am I doing in the moment when like there is a moment of like there's nothing to do, you have nothing to do. Like maybe it's during a break, maybe when you're on the bus, maybe you're sitting somewhere and you're waiting for something. And you know, just 20 years ago there would just be silence because you wouldn't have Wi-Fi and you wouldn't have a smartphone. Even like 20 years ago, and definitely 30 years ago, like 100% 30 years ago, there wasn't anything like that. You just sit there and you stare at the wall or you look out of the window. And we don't do that anymore. But whenever I decide to do that and I put my phone away, in the beginning I feel uncomfortable, but then I actually feel more relaxed. There is like a moment. There are like a couple minutes of discomfort, and then when I make it through this discomfort of silence, and this can be a couple minutes and this could be a little longer, it's almost like you're withdrawing from a drug. It's like you're kind of like you're refusing to follow this addiction, and so there is this discomfort, and I really consciously call it addiction. I'm very conscious about this, and maybe it's not a very obvious addiction because you don't have a physical, like a physically visible or very measurable result from this, but probably if you would talk to a psychologist, you probably would notice that there is a difference from how you're like there is something happening in your brain. And I would say for myself, I can call it an addiction. Like if I have to check Instagram, if I have to check something and do something because for some reason I feel like I have to, like that's an addiction. So I ask myself, what's the need behind it? What is the longing behind it? What is the desire behind it? Because for everything that we do, when it's not very healthy, what we're doing, or it doesn't really make a lot of sense, like when I spend time just like scrolling through different Instagram posts, and then I go to YouTube, and instead of watching one thing, like you can watch one video with intention, and that's very satisfying. And there's a lot of really good content. People became really good at creating good quality, high quality content and really beautiful content. If I consciously go there and consume that, then I feel okay. But what usually happens, very honestly, is that I start consuming one thing after another, and then the other thing, and then the next thing, and then I click on this, and I'm like, oh, this looks funny, I'm going to click on this. Right? Sounds familiar? I don't think I know a single person in my social circles who doesn't do this. I think we all do this, maybe in different ways. And so I ask myself, what is the need behind this? And sometimes my need is just fun, like dopamine, fun, entertainment. So that means like I want to have some fun, and instead of like doing something proper that actually really creates like a meaningful joy, I do this like quick fix, this like little dopamine package that you get a little dopamine spike. That's number one. That's the number one reason. And the number two reason number two is connection. I'm looking for connection. I'm looking for, what is this person doing? What is that friend doing? And it's an illusion that I feel connected to this person, but all I'm doing is I'm just looking at some video, and I'm not even talking to the person. when did we, honestly, when did we stop talking to people and just like consume stories of each other without talking to each other? And we think we connect to each other, but we're just like publishing, uploading stories, and then we think we are connected. And we stop talking, we just check the stories, and then we like it, and then we go to the next one, and then we like it, and then we go to the next one. And how do you feel after that? And you do this every day, and sometimes you almost do this every hour. And it's different every day. Like on some days I do this a bit more, on some days I do this a bit less. And so here's the reason I'm sharing this. For me, it's really important when I notice that I have this behavior to first of all really ask the reason behind it, which are mainly the two reasons that I mentioned. Fun, like joy. Fun is kind of superficial because fun is very temporary, but I think what I really like deep inside, what I look for is joy, like this happiness, what we all want. And then the second thing is connection, meaningful connection with people. And then that's helpful for me to know. And then, sometimes, or maybe I'm going to rephrase that in a different way. There is a need, and there is, you could say, a strong desire. And the strong desire means that there is a lack of something, right? I'm missing something and I need this because I don't have it. I don't have happiness, so I need to find it outside of myself, outside in the external world, from other people, from other experiences, from other things, material things, things I consume. I find happiness in the food I eat. And so you're looking for this happiness outside. And the same thing with connection. Where do you find it? Where can you go? Like, where do people love you? Which person can love me and validate me so I feel like I'm worthy and there is like some kind of meaning to my life? Like, basically, right? Like, that's what it is on a deeper level. And this brings me to the Buddhist story of the empty flute. And it sounds very spiritual, but I mean, see if you can just like open your mind for it. It's a very metaphorical kind of concept, but I really love this. So, and the story is very simple. Imagine, and actually, to be honest, I don't even know where the story comes from. I heard it, I know who quoted the story, Kim Eng. Her name is Kim Eng. And she quoted it in a video, and so I'm retelling the story, but I don't know the original like source of the story. So imagine you have a flute, right, the music instrument, and then you put a bean into the flute, like the dry beans that if you cook you eat. You can eat the beans, but first the beans come in a dry version. So you put one bean, you put another bean, and then you have many beans in the flute. And you can't play the flute with the beans inside. And in the story, when she tells the story, she says that every bean is a worry. So you can say the beans are worries. The flute is a metaphor for yourself, right? You are the flute. I am the flute, and I fill myself with worries. Those are the beans. That's one way of looking at it. And another way of looking at it is that the beans are the replacement, the longing for the happiness. So the beans are like the Instagram stories, or the beans are the YouTube videos that are not really deeply satisfying, but that are just filling me up. So whatever you fill yourself up with to not feel empty, those are the beans. And so if you empty the flute and you remove all the beans, you can play the flute And there is a beautiful sound, a beautiful melody coming from the flute, and you are the flute. So the meaning is that when you become empty, there is something within yourself that you can't see, but that you can experience when you become empty. And in the story, when Kim Eng shares the story, she says that the universe or the life force is flowing through you. Or if you resonate with the word God, I think God, just the word of it or the concept can bring up a lot of different things for people. But you could also say, that you can connect to God when you become empty. I like to use the word universe. You can replace it with with whatever you want, like whatever you believe. And even if you just believe that you connect to yourself, that's maybe a really nice way. The way I said it in the beginning, like there is something within yourself that can come out that you cannot see or touch, but it's the music of the flute. It's a beautiful melody, but it can only be heard and it can only be played when the flute is empty. You can see it this way. And if you want to take it a bit further and be very spiritual, which I like to be, if you know me a little bit, you could say that the universe is playing the flute. You are the flute. But you have to be empty for the universe to be able to play the flute. The universe, in a way, needs you to be empty so the music can come out of you. I think that's beautiful. So I'm like, all right, let's get rid of the beans. Let's get rid of every bean. And if we stick to Buddhist philosophy, you know that Buddhism, the Four Noble Truths of Buddhism are all about suffering. It's all about suffering. We all suffer. The suffering is real, and there is an end to suffering. There is a way to the end of suffering, and the suffering will end. And that means becoming empty. But we suffer on the way to becoming empty. Like it's not gonna be fun to remove the beans and to stop doing what you're doing, to fill yourself up, to fill the silence, to avoid your thoughts, to avoid your uncomfortable feeling, and it's absolutely 100% worth it. And I think if you've ever been through a hard time in your life, then you know it. Like from that time in your life when things were really difficult and challenging, that something came from it that was really powerful and helpful. Maybe a realization that you had after you went through that time, maybe a type of personal growth that came from it, from that difficult time that you made through. You become wiser. This is where wisdom comes from. Wisdom comes from life experience, and wisdom usually comes from the challenges that we go through. And so you could say, by allowing your flute to be empty, just the process of deciding every time to empty yourself like the flute, to become empty like the flute, is wisdom. The second thing I wanted to share, another story, is about the hungry ghost, and I'm gonna read to you about the hungry ghost. The hungry ghost is a term in Buddhism and Chinese traditional religion representing beings who are driven by intense emotional needs in an animalistic way, and they're usually depicted like monsters with a really big belly, like really fat, but at the same time they have a small mouth. Hungry ghosts are thought to be lower, more animalistic spirits driven by passion or greed. So they're greedy, and they can also represent the souls of those who were murdered or committed suicide or did not receive a proper burial. And they're often depicted with bloodshot eyes. Oh, very intense. And so they feel empty, right? The hungry ghost feels empty. And the hungry ghost is us trying to fill ourselves up. And it's never enough, right? It's the perfect metaphor, the perfect creature symbolizing the greediness of wanting to be happy all the time and being unable to be uncomfortable, not being able to process things that are maybe negative. But mainly the hungry ghost just always wants more and cannot stop. So it's, I think the hungry ghost for me is a good symbol for addiction or like a compulsive behavior that we cannot stop, even though we are very aware that it is unhealthy and that it is not serving us, and that we really, on a deeper level, we don't really need this, right? And we all know this. This is not a secret. This is nothing new. Like when you have a chocolate ice cream, that's fine. But if you have like chocolate ice cream, let's say like every day, like you don't really need this. Your body does not need this. Your physical body does not need any chocolate ice cream. But we have chocolate ice cream in this beautiful world, and you could just have a little bit. But the hungry ghost would probably eat all of the ice cream, and then he would go to the shop and have a pizza or a burger, and then the hungry ghost would go and have something else. Keep on going. That's the hungry ghost. And so again, I think it's important to not be judgmental, and to, instead of being judgmental, be very, very compassionate with yourself. And I'm also totally saying this to myself. Compassion for what you're doing to fill yourself. Just notice it. And noticing it is the first step. And then try to not fill yourself up with all the beans, and see what happens when you're empty. And this is much easier said than done. And the purpose of this podcast episode is not to say it's easy. The intention is just to give you this, these stories, maybe to remember these stories in a moment when you're about to do something that you maybe don't really want to do. And then you know there are many different things that we can learn. And there are many different ways of dealing with our emotions and our desires. And I'm not saying all of the desires are bad, although in Buddhism and many other thought concepts in society, we know that desires are usually being judged. I don't think that any desire should be judged. I think you create more suffering when you judge your desires, and you create more suffering, you get even hungrier, and then it's almost like you explode. And so, no judgment, please. And I'm also totally saying this to myself. So I hope some of these stories resonated with you, or at least maybe they were just interesting. And I'm sending everyone a big hug who is listening to this. Thank you for listening until the very end. And I hope to hear you soon again, or see you soon somewhere. And you're always welcome to connect in a real way. And please take care of yourself. And I wish you a beautiful day or a beautiful evening or a good night whenever you're listening to this.